The disinfectant smell hit first, bleach and wet concrete and something underneath it, warm and animal. And then came the barking. 3 kennels down, one dog throwing itself against a chain-link run, like it meant to argue with the fence itself. Why does the old man in the faded coat keep parking at the same spot outside the kennel fence, notebook open, every single Thursday for 4 years running? Nobody at Camp Ellsworth had ever asked him. Nobody had ever gotten close enough to. "She doesn't listen to anybody but me," Sergeant Austin Whitfield said, loud enough to carry across the yard, loud enough that the 2 junior handlers polishing gear by the supply shed looked up. "That's not how it works. Never has. 11 days. That was the number sitting on the clipboard-free page of Corporal Brooke Red's memory, because nobody had written it down anywhere official. 11 days since Cedar had completed a single scored drill. 11 days of a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois with a spotless service record, sitting down mid-search, ears low, eyes fixed on the parking lot, like she was waiting on a truck that wasn't hers to wait on. Thursday, 0900. 3 days out. A hearing was scheduled in a windowless room, with Cedar's name typed at the top of a decommissioning form. And 40 yards from where Whitfield stood, squared up and certain, an old Chevy pickup the color of a rain cloud sat parked along the outer fence line, engine ticking as it cooled. An old man behind the wheel with a small notebook open on his knee and a pencil moving in it, unhurried, like he had nowhere else on earth to be, and never had. If you've ever been written off because of how you looked, before anyone bothered to ask what you knew, type steady in the comments. Nobody at the gate had run his plates yet. Nobody had asked his name. He was, at that moment, only a shape in a faded barn coat, cap pulled low, parked where visitors weren't supposed to park, watching a kennel yard the way another man might watch weather roll in over a field he'd worked his whole life, not with curiosity, but with the specific attention of somebody checking on something he already knew the shape of. Cedar threw herself against the run one more time, then went still all at once, folding down onto the concrete like the air had gone out of her. And across the yard, Whitfield's jaw tightened, and he tapped 2 fingers against his thigh. Once, twice, the way he did when a dog was underperforming, and he needed everyone watching to understand that the failure belonged to the animal and not to him. 3 days to the hearing, 11 days of failure behind them. One old man parked outside a fence, and no one in that yard yet understood that the numbers that actually mattered, a service window 55 years closed, a name never entered into any record, a debt nobody living had thought to collect, were sitting quiet in his coat pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief gone soft with age, and that the dog on the concrete had been listening for him longer than anyone standing there had known there was anything to listen for. The coat was canvas once, though the years had worn it down past canvas into something closer to hide, a color that had started as barn door brown and faded to the pale gray of a field after first frost. It hung open over a flannel shirt gone soft at the elbows, the way flannel goes soft only after decades of the same 3 motions, repeated at the same hour, of the same kind of morning. His cap had been Marine Corps forest green once. Now it was the color of old bone, the eagle globe and anchor, stitched above the brim, worn down to a suggestion of itself, more felt than seen. He got out of the truck slow, favoring the left knee, one hand braced on the door frame, and stood a moment in the gravel lot before he moved, the way a man does when he's letting a joint decide, on its own schedule, whether it intends to cooperate that day. In the truck cab behind him, on the bench seat, sat a small spiral notebook, the cardboard back gone soft and curled at the corner, and a pencil worn down to a stub no longer than his thumb. He had written 4 words in the margin that morning before he'd cut the engine. The same 4 words, near enough, that he wrote most Thursdays, though the specific wording shifted with what he'd seen the week before. He did not look at what he'd written again. He folded the notebook shut, laid it on the seat, and reached instead into the left pocket of the barn coat, where a small square of cloth held something with weight and edges, wrapped the way a man wraps a thing he has wrapped 10,000 times before, without needing to look at his own hands to do it. He did not take it out, he only touched it, the way another man might touch a rosary in a coat pocket during a long sermon, a check that it was still there, still real, still his. Then, Low, almost under the reach of hearing, he whistled 3 notes. Not a tune exactly. 3 notes. Rising, holding, falling. The kind of thing a person hums without meaning to, while shelling peas or hanging wash. A habit worn into him by somebody else's habit, years before it became his own. He did it now the way he did it most mornings. Hands in his pockets. Weight settled back on his heels, looking through the chain link at a yard full of dogs that did not know him yet. 40 yards off, inside the fence, Corporal Brooke Red stood with a lead coiled over one shoulder, and watched him the way you watch a thing you can't yet name a reason for watching. She was 24, new enough to the kennel program that she still flinched a little at Whitfield's voice when it went hard. But she had spent enough hours around working dogs to have learned to read stillness the way some people read a face. And there was something in how this old man stood, the weight distributed, the shoulders loose, the attention pointed but not staring, that reminded her, without her being able to say why, of the handlers she trusted most, the ones who never raised their voices because they had never needed to. "Who's that?" she said, mostly to herself, mostly to the dog beside her, a young shepherd mix in training, who had no answer to give her either. She had seen him twice before, she realized, thinking back. A gray shape at the far edge of the lot, on a Thursday morning weeks ago, gone by the time she'd looked twice. She had not thought much of it. Visitors parked wrong all the time. The base got its share of retirees driving out for no reason but the memory of having once worn the uniform themselves, men who liked to sit near a flagpole and remember. She had filed him, without deciding to, under harmless. It was only now, watching him watch the kennel with that same unhurried attention he seemed to have brought with him every time, notebook already closed, pencil already put away, that the filing began to feel wrong. He was not remembering. He was checking on something. He shifted his weight off the bad knee, glanced once toward the kennel runs where Cedar lay folded on the concrete, and for just a moment, something crossed his face that was not curiosity and was not sentiment either. Something closer to recognition, the particular stillness of a man watching a thing he has already seen happen once before, a long time ago, to somebody else. Then he turned toward the gate and began, without hurry, to walk toward it. The private on gate duty was young enough that his collar still smelled like the quartermaster's plastic wrap, and he squared up fast when the old man came within 20 feet, one hand rising, palm out, in the universal shorthand for "that's far enough." "Sir, this is a restricted facility. I'm going to have to ask you to state your business or return to your vehicle." "I understand," Emmett said. His voice was low, unhurried, gravel-worn smooth. "I'd like to speak with whoever runs the kennel program today. Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then I can't let you through, sir. You'll need to go through the visitor liaison office, and that's—" The private glanced over his shoulder, uncertain, the way young soldiers do when the manual doesn't quite cover the man standing in front of them. An old fellow in a coat gone the color of dust, cap bleached past reading, no ID presented, no vehicle pass visible on the dash 40 yards back. It was Sergeant Whitfield who came across the yard to settle it. Boots quick on the gravel, and something in his stride said he'd already decided what kind of problem this was before he arrived close enough to know. He took in the coat, the cap, the resoled boots, the hands, and filed the old man the same way Brooke Red had, weeks earlier, from a greater distance. Harmless, misplaced, a stray wandered onto the wrong lot. "Help you find something, sir?" Whitfield said, and there was a grin under it meant for the 2 junior handlers who drifted close to watch. The kind of grin that turns a stranger into an audience prop before the stranger has said a word. "I came to see the dogs," Emmett said. "This isn't a petting zoo." A small laugh went around the gathering handlers. Not unkind exactly, but not kind either. The laugh of young people enjoying being young and certain in front of someone who is neither. "We've got a working program here, sir. Government working dogs. Highly trained. They don't just come running for anybody who wanders up smelling like—" Whitfield paused, searching, and one of the handlers behind him supplied, "Low, hey," and the laugh went around again, brighter this time. Emmett didn't answer that. He looked past Whitfield's shoulder, toward the run where Cedar lay, and something in his face went very quiet and very focused. The way a man's face goes quiet when he's reading weather instead of a person. "Tell you what," Whitfield said, warming to it now, half-turned to make sure his audience had a clear line of sight. "Let me show you what a real working relationship looks like. Might save you the trip next Thursday." He said Thursday with a little extra weight, like a man who had, in fact, noticed the truck before today and simply hadn't cared to mention it. He clipped a lead to his belt kit, walked to the run, and called Cedar out with a hand signal crisp enough to have come from a training video. The dog rose. For a moment it looked like it might work. Cedar came to heel, ears up, and Whitfield ran her through the first element of a standard search pattern, sweeping her nose along a row of staged containers, his voice pitched exactly right, his footwork textbook. It was, for 8 or 9 seconds, genuinely good handling, the kind of clean, unshowy competence that comes from years of repetition done properly, and even the old man watching through the fence seemed to note it, some small adjustment in his stillness that looked almost like respect. Then Cedar stopped at the 4th container, and did not indicate, and did not move, and sat down instead, facing the parking lot again, ears dropping by degrees, like a held breath finally let go. Whitfield's jaw worked. He tried the command twice more, voice climbing just slightly each time, and the 2 fingers of his free hand tapped once, twice, against his thigh. "That's not how it works," he said again, quieter now, mostly to himself, and did not look at the old man on the other side of the fence, who had not said a single word since, and did not need to. It was Colonel Rufus Stubbs's policy, posted in a memo nobody but Brooke Red had ever bothered to actually read past the header, that any visitor with reasonable cause and no security flag could observe training from the perimeter bench, and it was that half-forgotten line of paperwork, and nothing Whitfield said, that got Emmett a seat instead of a walk back to his truck. Whitfield relayed the ruling with visible reluctance, arms crossed, as if the policy were a personal insult authored specifically to embarrass him, and pointed Emmett toward a weathered bench along the fence, with the flat tone of a man conceding a point he intended to win back later. Emmett sat. He set his cap on his knee, the notebook beside it, and watched. He did not watch the way the junior handlers watched, following commands and results, waiting to see if the dog obeyed. He watched the dog's shoulders, the set of her ears, the particular way her weight rocked forward and then arrested itself, again and again, as though something in her kept starting toward the parking lot and kept remembering, too late each time, that she wasn't allowed. He watched how she flinched, not at loud sounds, but at silences that lasted a beat too long. He watched the way she would not hold eye contact with Whitfield for more than a second or two, not out of disobedience, but the way a person looks away from a kindness they can't currently afford to receive. 20 feet off, at the shaded end of the yard, Whitfield stood with a man in civilian clothes and a tablet. A broad, unhurried man in his 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into thinning hair. Dale Montclair. Though Emmett didn't yet have the name, only the posture. The posture of a man discussing an outcome, rather than a problem. "The scores are clean across 11 sessions, Montclair was saying, tapping the tablet screen without looking at it. The gesture of a man citing a document he had already memorized. No physical cause, no injury, nothing in the vitals. She's simply not performing to standard anymore, and Thursday's hearing is a formality at this point. I've got a replacement dog already inbound. Cleaner lineage, frankly, than what we started this program on. She was the best dog I've ever handled," Whitfield said, and there was something almost wounded under the words, quickly covered. "Sentiment isn't in the scoring rubric, Sergeant." Emmett said nothing. He wrote one line in his notebook, unhurried, and closed it again. It was Brooke Red who came and sat at the far end of the bench some while later, not asked to, not sent, drawn by something she couldn't yet name any better than she'd named the truck weeks before. She didn't introduce herself. She watched him watch the dog for a full minute before she spoke. "You're not looking at what she's doing," she said. "You're looking at what she's not doing." Emmett glanced at her, and something in his face eased, just slightly, the look of a man who has been asked, at last, the right question by the right person. "That's about the size of it," he said. "What is it then? What's she not doing?" He was quiet a moment, watching Cedar's shoulders rock forward, a rest, settle. "She's not looking for anybody," he said. "She's looking for one somebody. Everything else, she's just going through." Brooke frowned, turning that over, and did not yet understand it fully, though she would. Whitfield's voice rose again across the yard, sharper now, the fourth failed repetition of the afternoon, and Cedar folded down onto the concrete once more, ears low, gaze already sliding back toward the gate, toward the fence, toward the old man sitting quiet on the bench, with his cap on his knee and his hand resting, without seeming to notice it himself, on the outside of his coat pocket. He rose from the bench slow, the bad knee taking its toll first, one hand finding the fence rail for balance before he trusted his own weight to it. Nobody stopped him this time. Whitfield was 30 feet off, mid-argument with Montclair about scoring thresholds, and the two junior handlers had drifted toward the supply shed, and Brooke Red only watched, silent, as the old man crossed to where the fence met the training yard and stopped there, both hands loose at his sides. Cedar lay folded on the concrete, ears down, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, the way eyes go when a body has stopped expecting anything worth looking at. Emmett did not call her. He did not clap or whistle or crouch to make himself smaller and friendlier the way people do with frightened dogs on television. He stood still, weight settled back, breath slowing visibly, the particular unhurried draw and release of a man counting down from a number only he could hear. And when his hand came up, it moved the way a man's hand moves when it has done a thing 10,000 times and trusts the doing more than the thinking. He pressed two fingers to his own chest, once, flat, still. Then he said the word. Steady. It was not loud. It carried the way a dropped stone carries through still water, outward and down. And for one full second, nothing in the yard moved at all. Not Whitfield, mid-sentence, not Montclair, tablet still raised, not the two junior handlers who'd turned at the sound of an unfamiliar voice using a word they'd never heard issued as a command. Cedar's ears came up. She turned her head first, slow, toward the fence, toward the old man standing there with his hand still pressed flat against his own chest. Then her whole body turned with it, weight shifting off the concrete, and she rose. Not the crisp obedience-trained rise of a command executed, but something looser, older, a body remembering a shape it had been given before it had ever been given a rank or a number. She crossed the yard at a walk, not a run, ears forward, tail low and even, past Whitfield, who took one step to intercept and then simply didn't, arm half raised and frozen there. She came to the fence, and Emmett crouched, slow, the bad knee complaining audibly enough that Brooke Red heard it from 10 feet off, and put his hand flat against Cedar's chest through the chain link. Still, not patting, only resting. Cedar sat, her whole body folded down into it the way water finds the bottom of a glass, complete and without argument. And she leaned her weight into the fence and into his hand, eyes half closing, breath slowing to match some rhythm that had nothing to do with any command Whitfield had spent 2 years teaching her. Nobody in the yard said anything for 11 full seconds. Brooke Red counted them without meaning to, the way you count a held breath. Montclair lowered his tablet an inch. One of the junior handlers by the supply shed had gone very still, the stillness of someone recognizing, before they could have said why, that they were watching something they would remember. Whitfield's arm was still half raised, fingers spread, as if his body hadn't yet received the message his eyes had already sent it. "That's," he started, and stopped, and started again. "That's not how it works." Emmett didn't look up from the dog. His hand stayed where it was, flat, still, and his voice, when it came, was almost gentle. "She's not failing her tests, Sergeant. She's grieving something your paperwork doesn't have a box for." Nobody moved to argue that. The yard held its silence a moment longer, disinfectant and distant barking and the low, even breath of a dog gone quiet at last. And somewhere behind that silence, unremarked, a truck sat cooling 40 yards off, with a notebook on the bench seat, its most recent margin note still unread by anyone but the man who'd written it. Whitfield lowered his arm at last and looked at the old man kneeling at his fence, with an expression that hadn't fully decided yet whether it was anger or something closer to vertigo. He got his footing back faster than his face did. "All right," Whitfield said, straightening, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve, the way men do when they need their hands to have a job. "That's a neat trick, I'll give you that." He glanced at Montclair, at the tablet still raised, and something in the glance asked for backup before he'd finished asking for it out loud. But a dog sitting still for a stranger for 10 seconds isn't data. Dale's got 11 sessions of scored performance, saying she's unfit for duty. You've got, he gestured at Emmett, at the coat, at the fence, at all of it. Whatever this is. He's not wrong about the scores, Montclair said, mild, almost generous about it, tapping the tablet awake again. I want to be fair here. The instrumentation is sound. Scent discrimination, obstacle negotiation, recall under distraction. All measured, all repeatable, all failing. I don't doubt the sergeant loves this animal. But love isn't in the rubric, and neither is a nice moment at a fence line. He said it without cruelty, the way a man recites a fact he has recited so many times it has stopped requiring him to feel anything about it at all. Thursday, 0900. The board reviews the file as submitted. I've already got a dog in transit from our kennel. Good bloodline, clean temperament screening, no history to complicate the transition. It'll be on base by Wednesday night. Emmett rose slowly from the fence, one hand braced on the rail, the bad knee unfolding by degrees, and Cedar rose with him on the other side of the chain link, still leaning her weight where his hand had been, as if the fence itself had absorbed some of the contact and she meant to keep drawing off it. Your instruments aren't wrong, Emmett said. He was not looking at Montclair when he said it. He was looking at the dog. They're just not measuring what's happening to her. You can test a dog's obedience all day, and never once test what she's carrying. And what's she carrying? Whitfield said. And there was an edge in it now. Not mockery exactly. Something thinner and more exposed than mockery. The sound of a man who suspects he's about to hear something he won't be able to unhear. Emmett was quiet a moment. Somewhere behind him, a kennel door swung and settled. I had a dog once, he said. German Shepherd. Name of Bishop. 1969. Over in a place with no kennels like this one, no scored drills, just heat and noise, and men who needed him more than any of us liked to admit. He paused, and his hand found the outside of his coat pocket again, resting there without seeming to notice it did. We lost a man he was close to, not killed under him, nothing like that. Reassigned, sudden, no chance to say anything to it. And Bishop stopped working, just like her. He nodded, once, toward Cedar. Everybody around us said he was ruined, said we ought to retire him out, get a fresh dog with a clean file. Command was ready to do it inside a week. What happened? Brooke Red asked, quiet, from where she'd drifted closer without seeming to move at all. I sat with him instead of running him, Emmett said. Took about 11 days before he'd look at me again, like there was a reason to. Nobody in the yard said anything to that number, though Brooke's eyes went, involuntarily, to the calendar posted near the kennel office, where Thursday sat circled in red 3 days off, and did the arithmetic without wanting to. Whitfield's 2 fingers had gone still against his thigh. He didn't look convinced. He looked, for the first time since Emmett had arrived at that gate, like a man doing sums he didn't like the answer to. The base's outer gate opened at 3 that afternoon, for a car nobody at the kennel had been told to expect, and Colonel Rufus Stubbs came across the gravel lot in civilian clothes with the particular unhurried authority of a man who has never once needed a uniform to be obeyed. He was 74, broad through the shoulders still, silver-headed, and he crossed the yard toward the fence with his eyes fixed on the old man in the barn coat, the way a man looks at a debt he had begun to fear he'd never get the chance to pay. He stopped 3 feet off. He drew himself up, and something crossed his face that Brooke Red would describe to herself later, and never quite adequately, as the look of a much younger man surfacing briefly inside an older one. Sergeant, he said, to Whitfield, without looking at him, step back a moment. Then to Emmett, and his voice caught, just barely, on the single syllable he'd clearly meant to deliver clean. Sir, it's an honor. Whitfield's mouth opened, Nothing came out of it. Stubbs did not explain himself yet. He reached into the leather satchel over his shoulder and drew out a ledger, its cover cracked, its binding repaired at some point with tape gone brittle and amber, and set it on the fence rail between them with both hands. The way a man sets down something he has carried farther than the distance between the car and the gate. 1969, Stubbs said, and now his voice had steadied, gone level and formal, a report delivered rather than a memory indulged. 3rd Marine Division. I was a lieutenant, green as spring grass, and there was a resupply extraction that went sideways in the worst hour of the worst week I had over there. And there was a dog handler who got 4 of my men and their dog out through country I wouldn't send anybody through today. And I never— He stopped and started again, quieter. I never got the chance to thank him properly. Man like that doesn't linger for thanks. He just goes home. He opened the ledger to a page marked with a strip of cloth gone thin as paper and turned it so Whitfield and Montclair and Brooke Red could all see the handwriting there. Small, careful, engineering neat. A training protocol laid out in numbered steps, imprint sequences, vocal cue charts, a column marked steady command, grounding gesture, and at the bottom of the page, a signature. E. Tatum. This is the original imprint protocol, Stubbs said. The one this base's whole modern training program was built off of. Generation after generation of dogs, going back to the line Cedar herself descends from. Your file up at headquarters credits a training company that came along 15 years after this was written. Somebody cleaned the paperwork up somewhere along the way, gave credit to whoever was easiest to credit, and the man who actually wrote it never said a word. Because saying a word was never what he came here to do. Montclair had gone very quiet. His tablet had lowered all the way to his side. There's one more thing in that file, Colonel, Emmett said, and though his voice hadn't changed at all, something in the yard seemed to lean toward it. Might be worth your board seeing before Thursday. Whoever's been signing off on decommissioning dogs and restocking from one particular kennel line ought to have that arrangement looked at by somebody who isn't him. Stubbs's eyes moved to Montclair, slow and level, and Montclair, for the first time all afternoon, did not have a figure ready to sight. The yard had gone quiet in a different way now, not the frozen silence of the fence line moment, but something heavier, the silence of people recalculating everything they thought they'd understood about the man in the faded coat. Whitfield stood with his arms no longer crossed, hands loose at his sides, staring at the ledger page as though the ink might rearrange itself if he looked long enough. You wrote this, he said. Not a question. His voice had lost the pitch he'd used all afternoon, the one built for an audience. It was smaller now, and it cracked slightly on the last word. The whole imprint sequence, the vocal cue chart we still teach off of, that's you. Wasn't just me, Emmett said. There were 3 of us worked it out. Over a couple of years, mostly because we didn't want to keep losing good dogs to men who didn't understand what grief does to a working animal. I'm the only one of the 3 left standing to tell it, is all. Whitfield looked down at his own hands, at the laminated performance log still clipped to his belt, the modern rubric, the modern certification, the whole architecture of what he'd believed made him good at his job. My training pedigree, he said slowly, working it out loud, goes back to a certification course that's built on a protocol that goes back to, he looked up, to you. And I stood at that gate and told you this wasn't how it works. You weren't wrong that it's not how the manual says it works, Emmett said. You were wrong about whose manual it started as. I'm sorry, Whitfield said it plainly. Without performance, without an audience to pitch it to, the 2 junior handlers by the supply shed having gone as still and silent as the fence itself. I mocked you at that gate, in front of my own people. I'm sorry. Emmett let that sit a moment before he answered. The way a man lets a hot pan cool before he'll touch the handle. Don't need it, he said. Wasn't why I came. He looked past Whitfield, to where Cedar still lay pressed against the fence line, watching him the way she'd watched nothing else all afternoon. If your board's writing anything into the record this week, Sergeant, don't put my name on it. Put hers. A small nod toward the ledger. And put Bishop's name somewhere in there too, if there's a line for it. He's the one taught me what I just did. I only ever kept the lesson. Stubbs looked like he meant to argue that, and then didn't. Emmett crouched again at the fence, the knee complaining the same complaint it always made, and reached his hand through the chain link to rest flat against Cedar's chest. Still, unmoving, the exact gesture he'd used before. And this time he said it not as a demonstration for anyone watching, but simply because it was, apparently, still true. "Steady," he said, low, and Cedar's eyes half closed again, her breathing slowing to match the stillness of his hand. And for a moment, neither of them seemed aware that 6 people stood watching. "Show me," Whitfield said. He'd come to crouch on his own side of the fence now, careful, the performance entirely gone out of him. "However you're doing that, whatever's actually happening there, show me, so I can do it when you're not here." Emmett looked at him a long moment, weighing something, and then nodded. "Slow. Hand flat," he said. "Not a pat. A dog that's grieving doesn't want comfort moving at her. She wants something that isn't going anywhere." He guided Whitfield's own hand to the fence, showed him the angle, the stillness, the particular patience of a touch that asks nothing. "And you don't call her under a word. She already knows the shape of failing. You give her a new one that was never attached to a test she could fail." He said it again, so Whitfield could hear the exact weight of it. Steady. Under both their hands now, one old and scarred, one young and uncertain, Cedar exhaled long and slow, the particular sound of a body finally allowed to stop bracing and did not otherwise move at all. The stillness, this time, entirely her own to give. The hearing scheduled for Thursday at 0900 never happened. Colonel Stubbs canceled it himself, in writing, citing new information requiring review of the assessment process, and the replacement dog already in transit from Dale Montclair's kennel line was quietly redirected to a training program 2 states over that had never heard Cedar's name and never would need to. Montclair's resale contract went up the chain the following week, attached to a memo with a title so dry it could have put a person to sleep reading it. And whatever came of that was handled in rooms Emmett Tatum never asked to be shown, because it was never the part he'd come for. The base's kennel lineage records were updated inside the month. A clerk who had never met either man typed a new line into the training protocol history, and beside the modern certification course that had claimed sole credit for 15 years, a second name went in above it, in its proper place, chronologically first. E. Tatum, handler, 1963 to 1969, 3rd Marine Division, co-author of original imprint protocol. Beneath it, at Emmett's specific request, delivered through Colonel Stubbs, because Emmett had no interest in filling out the paperwork himself, a second line was added. Smaller, easy to miss, unless you were looking for it. In memory of Bishop, scout dog, whose grief taught the lesson first. Corporal Brooke read that second line more than once. In the weeks that followed, on the mornings she came in early to run Cedar through drills that no longer failed. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday that needed no truck parked outside any fence, Emmett Tatum sat at his kitchen table as the light outside went the particular gold color October light goes right before it gives up on the day. The kettle on the stove had come to a full boil and clicked off on its own, and he let it sit a moment before he rose to pour it, the way he always had, the way Opal always used to tell him not to, water going off the boil, and he'd never once fixed the habit because some part of him liked keeping the small argument alive a little longer. On the table beside the kettle, unwrapped now from its handkerchief, for the first time in longer than he could easily say, sat the brass clasp, tarnished dark at the edges, the stamped word, steady, catching the last of the window light at an angle that made the letters look, for a moment, freshly cut. He whistled the 3 notes low, the way he always did over this table, rising, holding, falling, and did not think particularly hard about why, because after 11 years, it had stopped needing thinking about at all. 40 minutes away, past a base gate that no longer required him to explain himself to anyone at all, a young Malinois named Cedar lay curled and unbothered in a kennel run, gone quiet for the night. Her name entered properly now, beside a second name she had never needed anyone to prove belonged there. Some debts take 55 years to come due, and they always do. That's a story worth remembering. Emmett set the kettle down, sat back in his chair, and let the last of the light go out of the window slow, the clasp resting cool and steady on the table beside him, exactly where it belonged.